It started, as most nightmares do, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday where the biggest concern was the pile of TPS reports on my desk, or the perpetually underperforming coffee machine. I remember the clock on my cubicle wall ticking past 2:30 p.m., the fluorescent hum a monotonous backdrop to the drone of office chatter. It was a typical late spring afternoon in Seattle, a city known more for its rain and grunge than for this. The first sign was a flicker on the news screens in the break room. Just a blurb, really. Something about a bizarre incident at the downtown ferry terminal. Unprovoked attack, the chyron read. Multiple casualties. Suspect apprehended. We all just shrugged. Another Tuesday, another headline. Nothing to see here. But then came the whispers. Not the usual office gossip, but something colder, more primal. Sarah from accounting mentioned her cousin, a paramedic, being called to the scene. Said it was like nothing she'd ever seen, Sarah mumbled, her voice low. Victims, drained, like completely, no blood left. We laughed it off, of course. Sarah had a flair for the dramatic. The laughter died with the screams. They say the first wave is always the most brutal, not because of the monsters, but because of the sheer unpreparedness of humanity. We were sheep led to slaughter, our modern lives a comfortable cage that had suddenly, violently dissolved around us. The first truly widespread reports came around 4 p.m. Not just the ferry terminal, but Pioneer Square, then Pike Place Market, then the financial district. Disjointed, panicked snippets on social media and local news. Mass casualties downtown. Something's happening. Stay indoors. I was on the 10th floor. My office building, usually a hive of activity, began to hum with a different kind of energy. The kind that precedes a stampede. Then the fire alarms shrieked, not in their usual drill cadence, but in a long, unbroken wail that clawed at your sanity. People surged towards the elevators, then the stairwells. Panic, raw and unadulterated, washed over us. I remember pushing through the throng, the air thick with fear and the metallic tang that would soon become synonymous with this new reality. My mind, bless its simple, pre-apocalypse logic, was still trying to rationalize. Maybe a gas leak, I thought. Terrorist attack. Anything but the truth. The awful, impossible truth. The truth revealed itself on the ground floor. The main lobby, usually pristine and bustling, was a charnel house. Bodies, grotesquely twisted, lay sprawled amidst overturned furniture and shattered glass, and standing over them, amidst the chaos, were the things that weren't human. Not anymore. They moved with an unnerving fluidity, a predatory grace that defied their gaunt, almost skeletal appearance. Their eyes, when they turned them towards the terrified survivors, glowed with an unnatural, hungry light. But it was their mouths that were truly horrifying. Elongated, distended, revealing not teeth, but something more akin to serrated bone, stained crimson. The first one I saw up close was tearing into a security guard near the revolving doors. There was a sound, a wet, slurping sound that will haunt my dreams until the day I join the unquiet dead. It didn't just bite, it consumed. It drained. And as it fed, its already grotesque form seemed to swell, its skin taking on a morbid, almost healthy sheen, before it would shrink back to its emaciated state. It was a cycle, a horrible, undeniable cycle of predation. My legs, against all rational thought, simply froze. My breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. It was only the sudden, visceral shriek of a woman being dragged from the stairwell that shocked me back into motion. I didn't think. I reacted. I dove behind an overturned reception desk, the cheap laminate scraping against my elbow. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The air was thick with the stench of blood and something else, something metallic and acrid, like burnt copper mixed with decay. It was the scent of death, but amplified, grotesque. From my meager hiding spot, I watched, and what I saw would forever sear itself into the fabric of my soul. The creatures moved with a chilling purpose. They weren't mindless zombies. They were hunters, intelligent, coordinated, almost graceful in their pursuit. They seemed to possess an unnatural strength, casually tossing aside office furniture, tearing through reinforced doors. And they were fast, unbelievably fast. A blur of motion, then a body falling. The terror wasn't just in their appearance or their methods. It was in the sheer speed of the contagion. I saw a man, moments after being bitten, seize up. His eyes rolled back, then snapped open, now glowing with that same malevolent light. His skin paled, veins bulging under the surface. In a terrifyingly short span, perhaps 30 seconds, maybe a minute at most, he was one of them. He stood, his neck unnaturally craned, and joined the hunt. The initial bite wasn't merely fatal, it was transformative. A biological weapon, self-replicating, faster than any virus I'd ever heard of. The scientific community, as I later pieced together from fragmented reports and desperate broadcasts, was blindsided. They'd theorized about pandemics, about bioterrorism, about zombie apocalypses, but never vampires. Not real ones. The initial reports from emergency rooms described a novel pathogen, something that caused rapid exsanguination and an equally rapid, horrifying metamorphosis. They called it, in those early futile hours, HaemovoricSyndrome, or HS, a clinical term for the end of the world. My phone, clutched in my trembling hand, was useless. No signal. The cellular towers, the internet, the entire fabric of our interconnected world seemed to have shredded in minutes. Power flickered, then died, plunging the lobby into a grim twilight illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lights and the unnatural luminescence of the creature's eyes. The city, moments before a vibrant tapestry of life, was becoming a tomb. I knew I couldn't stay there. The desk wouldn't hold. My gaze darted around, desperately searching for an exit, a path to somewhere, anywhere, away from this living nightmare. The back exit, perhaps? A service door leading to the alley? It was a slim chance, a needle in a haystack of horrors, but it was all I had. I crawled on my hands and knees, trying to stay low, trying to be silent. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shriek, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The air grew colder, an unnatural chill radiating from the unholy things that stalked the ruined lobby. I could feel their presence, a predatory weight in the air, even when they weren't directly in my line of sight. It was an instinctual dread, an ancient fear resurfacing from the depths of our evolutionary past. I emerged onto a deserted side street, the setting sun casting long, eerie shadows. The sky, a bruised purple and orange, seemed to mock the devastation below. Cars, abandoned mid-traffic, formed chaotic barricades. Their doors hung open, some still blaring forgotten music, creating a surreal soundtrack to the apocalypse. The few people I saw were either running in blind terror or lying still, lifeless. My apartment was 5 miles away, 5 miles of city streets now transformed into a hunting ground. My personal conflict, the nagging doubt about a promotion, the petty squabbles with my landlord, all of it evaporated like morning dew. All that mattered was survival. Pure, brutal, moment-to-moment survival. I had no weapon, no plan, just a primal urge to get somewhere safe, to understand what was happening, to find out if anyone else was still human. The streets were empty of pedestrians, but the them were everywhere. They moved with a disturbing agility, leaping from rooftops, scaling walls with unnatural ease. They hunted in packs, silent and deadly, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of life, any warmth. I hugged the shadows, moving from one alcove to the next, a ghost in my own city. The air was growing colder, not just from the setting sun, but from their pervasive chill. It was like walking through a freezer door, except the cold seeped into your bones, whispering of death. I reached a small convenience store, its front window shattered, the contents strewn across the sidewalk. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, a strange, almost offensive sensation in the face of such overwhelming horror. I needed supplies, food, water, anything to sustain myself. I slipped inside, the broken glass crunching under my worn office shoes. The store was eerily silent, save for the distant, almost imperceptible dripping of something, water, or perhaps blood, from a shattered shelf. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows, making every mundane object appear menacing. The shelves were picked clean of anything useful. Canned goods, bottled water, batteries, all gone. Only shattered wine bottles and discarded candy wrappers remained. The desperation of the first wave, the scramble for basic necessities, was evident in the wreckage. I felt a surge of despair. How was I supposed to survive if even the simple act of finding food was a struggle? Then I saw it. A single, unopened packet of beef jerky, tucked behind a display of broken beer bottles. It was a tiny victory, a microscopic spark of hope in the vast darkness. I snatched it, tearing open the packaging with trembling fingers. The savory processed taste was the most glorious thing I'd ever experienced. As I chewed, I scanned the store more thoroughly. The back office, maybe something there. A first aid kit, a forgotten radio. I pushed open the swinging door, revealing a cramped, dusty space. A desk, a filing cabinet, a grimy window overlooking a back alley. And on the desk, half hidden beneath a pile of receipts, was a dusty old ham radio. My heart leaped. Ham radio. Ancient, arcane, but perhaps still functional if the infrastructure was completely down. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all I had. I knew the basics from my grandfather's eccentric hobbies: power source, antenna, frequency. The radio was a relic, but it was a link, a potential whisper in the void. I dragged it out, ignoring the dust and the cobwebs, feeling a strange surge of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping, it was about understanding, about fighting back. As I rummaged for a power cable, a sudden chilling realization hit me. The way they transformed, the rapid draining, the lack of traditional wounds, only puncture marks. This wasn't a virus, it was something more. Something that mimicked the old legends, but with a terrifying biological twist. I remembered a documentary I'd seen years ago, about specialized enzymes that could break down blood cells instantly. What if these creatures had evolved something similar? A highly potent anticoagulant, perhaps, coupled with a fast-acting neurotoxin that incapacitated the victim, allowing for rapid blood extraction and cellular re-engineering. It was a horrific thought, but it fit the observed effects. The speed of the transformation suggested not just a transfer of genetic material, but an immediate, radical alteration of the host's physiology, perhaps even a parasitic takeover at a cellular level. My mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. If it was a biological agent, could it be contained, cured, or was this the new normal, a permanent shift in the food chain? The dread deepened. A cold, clammy hand gripping my heart. This wasn't just an outbreak, it was an extinction event. I found a frayed power cord, plugged it into the radio, and then into a nearby outlet. No power. Of course, the grid was down. My brief flicker of hope sputtered. I was an idiot. What good was a radio without electricity? Then another memory. My grandfather tinkering with a solar panel, powering his ancient radio for field day. Solar. The sun was setting, but tomorrow it would rise again. If I could find a small solar panel and a battery, it was a long shot, but it was a plan. A desperate, fragile plan in a world that had suddenly gone mad. I decided to make the convenience store my temporary base. It was small, defensible. I dragged shelves and debris to barricade the shattered front window and the broken back door. The task was exhausting, my muscles screaming in protest, but the physical labor was a welcome distraction from the ceaseless thrum of fear. As darkness fully descended, the city transformed once more. The scattered cries faded completely, replaced by an eerie, almost preternatural silence. But it wasn't truly silent. There was a low, persistent hum, a whisper on the wind. It was the sound of them, moving through the streets, their unholy hunger a palpable presence. I huddled behind the counter, clutching the fire extinguisher like a lifeline. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old building sounded like a footstep. My imagination, usually a source of comfort, now became a tormentor, conjuring visions of glowing eyes peering through the boarded-up windows. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the day's horrors, the screams, the blood, the impossible speed of the transformation. The faces of the people I'd seen fall, their humanity draining away with their blood. Was this it? Was this how the world ended? Not with fire or ice, but with a thirst that could never be quenched. I spent the rest of the first night in a state of hyper-alertness, every nerve ending screaming. The city, usually so alive, now felt like a vast empty graveyard patrolled by the undead, or perhaps not undead. Something new, something worse. The chilling reality of it settled in my gut, a heavy, cold stone. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a contained incident. This was an infestation. And I was just one man, alone, in a city of monsters, with a broken radio and a packet of beef jerky. The struggle had just begun, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it would only get harder from here. The second dawn brought no comfort. The first rays of sunlight, usually a symbol of hope, merely highlighted the desolation. The city, bathed in a sickly yellow light, looked like a forgotten diorama of a civilization, frozen in mid-catastrophe. Cars still stood abandoned, doors agape. Stray papers danced in the light breeze, carrying the faint scent of fear and decay. The air was eerily still, the usual urban symphony of traffic and human voices replaced by an unsettling, profound silence. I peered through a small crack in the boarded-up window of the convenience store. They were gone. The creatures, these HaemovoricSyndrome carriers, seemed to avoid direct sunlight. This was a crucial discovery, a flicker of understanding in the overwhelming chaos. Like the vampires of old, they were nocturnal. But why? My mind, still grappling with the scientific implications, tried to make sense of it. If it was a biological agent, perhaps their new physiology was hypersensitive to UV radiation, causing cellular breakdown or rendering their specialized enzymes inert. Or maybe the intense metabolic activity required for their rapid regeneration and blood processing was only sustainable in cooler, darker conditions. The sun, a life-giver to humanity, was their silent executioner. This was a weakness, a chink in their terrifying armor. The relief that washed over me was immense but fleeting. Sunlight meant safety, but only for a few hours. When night fell again, they would return, and I needed to move. My immediate goal was simple: find a functioning vehicle and get out of the city. Seattle was too large, too dense, too infested. The further I could get from the epicenter, the better my chances. My eyes scanned the street. Most cars were either damaged, out of gas, or simply dead. My gaze settled on a delivery van, parked haphazardly near a collapsed streetlight. It was larger than a car, more robust, and might even have some supplies inside. It was a long shot, but worth the risk. Before I ventured out, I needed to equip myself. The fire extinguisher was clumsy, but it was all I had. I also grabbed a few stray cans of soda and a bag of stale chips from a discarded display rack. Not ideal, but sustenance. Every calorie counted now. Stepping out into the morning light felt like emerging from a tomb. The silence was deafening, amplified by the occasional distant siren that seemed to scream its futility across the deserted urban landscape. The air felt heavy, pregnant with the unspoken horrors of the previous night. I approached the van cautiously, every nerve on edge. Even in daylight, the city felt dangerous, as if their predatory gaze still lingered in the shadows, waiting. The van's side door was ajar. I eased it open, revealing a cargo space filled with empty boxes and a lingering smell of stale pastries. No luck on supplies, but the keys were in the ignition, a miracle, or perhaps a forgotten oversight in the initial panic. My hands trembled as I slid into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then, gloriously, roared to life. The sound was deafening in the silence, a defiant challenge to the encroaching darkness. I fumbled with the gear stick, my mind racing. Where to go? North, perhaps? Towards Canada? Or east, over the mountains, away from the coastal density? My immediate thought was to head for the interstate, but I knew it would be a chaotic mess of abandoned vehicles and potential ambush points. Side streets would be slower, but safer. As I navigated the debris-strewn streets, the scale of the disaster became even more apparent. Burned-out buildings dotted the skyline, black scars against the morning sky. The pervasive smell of smoke mingled with that acrid metallic scent. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a city-wide catastrophe. The emergency services, the police, the National Guard, they were either overwhelmed, destroyed, or had simply ceased to exist. Our civilization had unraveled with terrifying speed, proving just how fragile our complex systems truly were. My personal conflict, that quiet desperation for normalcy, was slowly being consumed by a new, more urgent, more terrifying reality. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. I tried the radio, flicking through the static-filled channels. Nothing. Just the white noise of a dead world. But I kept trying, a desperate, almost ritualistic act of defiance against the silence. As I drove, I saw more evidence of the outbreak's brutal efficiency. Houses with shattered windows, cars crashed into fences, playgrounds where swings swayed mournfully in the breeze. Every scene told a silent story of terror and flight. I wondered about my family, my friends. Were they safe? Were they even alive? The thought was a raw wound, but I pushed it down. There was no room for sentimentality, not yet. Survival first. A sudden movement caught my eye, a figure lurking in the shadow of an underpass. It was a person, cowering, clearly alive. My heart leaped. Another survivor. I instinctively slowed the van, about to offer help, but then it moved fully into the light, and I saw the eyes, the unmistakable predatory glow. It was a them, and it was moving towards me, drawn by the sound of the engine. My foot slammed on the accelerator. The van lurched forward, leaving the creature behind. I felt a surge of cold dread. They weren't just nocturnal. They were active even in shaded areas, underpasses, heavily treed parks. Daylight offered protection, but not absolute immunity. This meant even during the day, vigilance was paramount. The creature's ability to sense me, even in the noise of the engine, was unnerving. Their senses were clearly heightened. Sight, hearing, smell, all seemingly far superior to humans. This was another evolutionary advantage, a hunter's toolkit perfectly adapted to urban predation. It solidified my understanding. These weren't just humans infected with a disease. They were a new species, a superior predator. My destination shifted, not just out of the city, but somewhere truly safe. A place where the sunlight was unobstructed, where I could see them coming. High ground, open spaces. I remembered a small, abandoned fire lookout tower in the Cascades, about 80 miles east of the city. My grandfather, the same one who'd loved ham radio, used to take me hiking there. It was remote, isolated, and offered a panoramic view. A long shot, a desperate gamble, but a place to aim for. The drive was slow, fraught with danger. I avoided the main arteries, instead navigating the winding, deserted residential streets. Every intersection was a gamble, every shadow a potential ambush. I saw more creatures, lurking in alleys, emerging from darkened doorways. They were sluggish in the heat, but still dangerous if you got too close. They seemed to possess a rudimentary intelligence, perhaps even a shared awareness, a hive mind guiding their movements. I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew I was there, that they were waiting for me. The silence of the city was broken only by the hum of the van's engine and the frantic beating of my own heart. The psychological toll was immense. Every flicker of movement, every distant sound, sent a jolt of panic through me. My mind was in a constant state of fight or flight, exhausting me even as I drove. Around noon, the van sputtered. The fuel gauge was almost empty. Another brutal reality check. Gas stations were likely either emptied or infested. My hope of reaching the lookout tower in the van evaporated. I would have to proceed on foot. I pulled into a small suburban neighborhood, the kind filled with manicured lawns and two-car garages. It looked eerily normal, a chilling contrast to the carnage downtown. But the empty streets, the uncollected mail, the overgrown gardens, all screamed of abandonment. I parked the van, grabbing my meager supplies, the jerky, soda, and the invaluable fire extinguisher. I also found a sturdy wrench in the toolbox. Not a great weapon, but better than nothing. My new mission, find a bicycle. Faster than walking, quieter than a car, and less reliant on fuel. I walked carefully, peering into garages, trying to find one unlocked, one that hadn't been picked over. The sun beat down, the temperature climbing into the low 70s Fahrenheit. Sweat beaded on my forehead, but I welcomed the warmth. It meant the creatures were less active, forced into the shadows. I found one, a mountain bike parked in an open garage door, almost as if left in a hurry. It had knobby tires, good for rough terrain, and a sturdy frame. A glimmer of fortune in a sea of despair. I threw my bag over my shoulder, hopped on the bike, and started pedaling. The rhythmic whir of the gears was a strange comfort. It felt like progress, however small. I was moving, adapting, surviving. But as I cycled through the eerily quiet suburban streets, a deeper, more insidious dread began to set in. The human element of this apocalypse. What had happened to the people who lived here? Had they escaped, or had they become part of the very threat I was fleeing? The silence felt heavy with their absence, a silent testament to the speed and efficiency of the outbreak. I came across a local park, a playground, swings still gently swaying in the breeze, a sandbox filled with abandoned toys, and at the edge of the park, near a thick stand of trees, was a small makeshift barricade, flimsy, made of picnic tables and fallen branches. and beyond it, a cluster of figures, humans, survivors. My heart pounded with a mix of relief and caution. Relief because I wasn't alone. Caution because in an apocalypse, other humans could be as dangerous as the monsters. Desperation breeds brutality. I approached slowly, dismounting from my bike. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. A man, gaunt and clearly exhausted, peered over the barricade. He held a rusty shotgun, its barrel glinting in the sunlight. His eyes were bloodshot, wary. "Who are you?" he croaked, his voice raspy. "Just a survivor," I replied, raising my hands to show I was unarmed. "Came from downtown, looking for a way out." He hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. "We're trying to figure things out too," he said, gesturing to the small encampment behind him. "About a dozen of us, mostly families. The military, they're gone. The police, gone. It's just us." I could see the despair in his eyes, mirrored in the faces of the others. Children huddled close to their parents, their eyes wide with fear. This was the human cost of the outbreak. Not just the dead, but the living, stripped bare of their world, facing an unimaginable future. "What do you know?" I asked him. "About them? The creatures?" He shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping his lips. "Only what we've seen. They hunt at night, fast, strong, and if they bite you, you turn. Quick, no hope." He gestured towards a smoldering pile in the distance. "We had to burn some of our own." His voice cracked. This was the collective horror, the agonizing choice of dealing with loved ones who had become monsters, the chilling ritual of cleansing, of severing the last ties of humanity. My gut twisted. "I think they avoid direct sunlight," I told him, hoping to offer some useful intelligence. "And they seem to be more active in shaded areas even during the day. Their senses are heightened. I think they might be a new species, not just a disease." He looked at me, a glimmer of interest in his tired eyes. "You think so? A new species?" "It fits," I said, my scientific mind trying to take over the primal fear. The speed of the transformation, the complete physiological change. It's not just a viral infection, it's a re-engineering, a biological weapon evolved for urban predation. The old legends were right, in a twisted way. Only these aren't supernatural. They're terrifyingly natural. He nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Well, whatever they are, they're here, and we're stuck. We tried heading east, but the bridges, they're either out or blocked by so many abandoned cars, it's impossible to get through." My heart sank. My plan to reach the lookout tower was failing before it even truly began. The city was a cage, a death trap. "We need a better plan," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "We need to understand them, their patterns, their weaknesses. This isn't just about escaping, it's about surviving long term, finding a way to live in this new world, or to fight it." He looked at me, a flicker of something new in his eyes, a spark of hope perhaps, or just the desperate urge for leadership. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "Information," I replied, remembering the ham radio. "We need to know what's happening outside this city. If there are safe zones, if anyone is fighting back, if there's a cure. We need to find a way to communicate." He frowned. "Communication? How?" "A radio," I said, pointing towards my bicycle, where the fire extinguisher still rested. "A ham radio. I saw one in a convenience store. If we can get it working, we might be able to reach someone." His eyes widened slightly. "A radio? You think it's possible?" "It's a long shot," I admitted, "but it's better than waiting here to be picked off one by one when night falls." The silence hung heavy between us. the desperate realities of their situation, the grim choice between futile inaction and a perilous risk. He looked at the other survivors, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. "All right," he said finally. "Tell us what you need. We'll help." And so my role shifted. From a terrified refugee, I became something else. A leader, a planner, a desperate investigator trying to unravel the mystery of the apocalypse. My personal conflict had been pushed aside by the sheer, brutal necessity of survival. The dread was still there, a constant companion, but now it was tempered by a newfound purpose. The story of survival had just gained its first precarious chapter of hope. The next few hours would determine if that hope was justified or merely a cruel delusion. The immediate goal was the ham radio. The man whose name I learned was Elias gathered what few able-bodied men and women remained in their small, fearful huddle. They were a motley crew, a retired schoolteacher, a young mechanic, a barista, and a mother clutching her child. None of them had any real skills for an apocalypse, beyond the primal instinct to survive. But they had hope and a desperate willingness to try. We decided to move as a group. Safety in numbers, however, limited. Elias insisted on leaving 2 of the stronger men to guard the barricade, a grim necessity. The rest of us, about 6 in total, set off. Elias and another man, a quiet fellow named Ben, carried a couple of scavenged baseball bats. I still had my fire extinguisher and the wrench, now feeling woefully inadequate against the horrors we knew lurked in the coming night. The plan was simple. Back to the convenience store, retrieve the radio, then to the nearest hardware store for a solar panel and a battery. It was daring, perhaps foolish, to re-enter the more densely populated areas, but the further we went into the suburban sprawl, the more isolated we would become, and the less likely to find the supplies we needed. The afternoon sun was high overhead, pushing the temperature towards 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The creatures, true to my observation, remained largely hidden. Still, every shadow felt like a lurking threat. We moved swiftly, keeping to the center of the road when possible, avoiding anything that could offer them cover. The eerie silence of the suburbs was punctuated only by our hurried footsteps and the distant, mournful creak of abandoned swings in another park. As we approached the convenience store, the sight of the shattered front window and the makeshift barricades brought a fresh wave of dread. I explained my earlier encounter with the woman and how I'd used the fire extinguisher. Elias nodded, his face grim. Good to know they can be disoriented, even if just for a moment. We cautiously entered the store. The smell of decay was stronger now, a chilling reminder of the previous night's horrors. The air was heavy, stagnant. I led them directly to the back office. The ham radio sat on the desk, a bulky, archaic piece of machinery covered in a fine layer of dust. "This is it," I said, patting its metal casing. "Our lifeline." Ben, the mechanic, immediately knelt down to inspect it. "Looks old but rugged," he mused, tracing a finger over the dials. "If we can get power, it might work." We carefully carried the radio out, cradling it like a fragile infant. The next destination, the hardware store. It was about a mile away on a small commercial strip. This was where the real risk began. Commercial areas with their wider streets and fewer hiding spots were more exposed. As we walked, I tried to explain what I understood of the outbreak, the theory of HaemovoricSyndrome. "It's not just a bite," I reiterated, my voice low. "It's a biological transfer, something in their saliva or blood that rapidly transforms human cells. It's incredibly efficient. Think of it like a highly specialized enzyme or a parasitic microbe that literally re-engineers your body on a cellular level, turning you into one of them. The speed of it, minutes, sometimes even seconds, suggests a direct attack on the nervous system and circulatory system, reprogramming them for their new, horrific purpose. Elias listened intently, his brow furrowed. So, no cure then? Not that I know of, I admitted. Not yet. But understanding how it works is the first step to figuring out how to stop it, or at least how to protect ourselves. We reached the commercial strip. The usual afternoon bustle was replaced by a chilling stillness. The hardware store's front doors were smashed inward, a clear sign it had already been looted. My heart sank. This was a pattern. Anywhere with valuable supplies would have been ransacked in the initial hours of chaos. Inside it was a mess. Shelves overturned, tools scattered, boxes ripped open. Desperate hands had clearly torn through the place. "We need a solar panel," I said, scanning the wreckage. "And a deep cycle battery if possible. Something that can hold a charge." Ben started sifting through the remains of the electrical aisle, while Elias and I kept watch at the entrance, our makeshift weapons at the ready. The sun was still high, but the shadows were growing longer, the first hint of dusk already creeping into the corners of the storefront. My gaze fell on a stack of promotional flyers near the register. Generator sale, they declared, a cruel joke. But next to them, a display rack of small portable camping solar panels. My heart leaped. Not ideal for a large ham radio, but enough to trickle charge a battery perhaps. "Ben," I called out, pointing. "Over here, camping panels." He quickly joined me, his eyes lighting up. "Good find, and look here," he added, pulling aside a stack of dusty boxes, revealing a few small sealed lead-acid batteries, the kind used for small boats or RVs. These could work. Not ideal, but better than nothing. We gathered the panels and 2 of the batteries, along with some wires and connectors. We also found a roll of heavy-duty duct tape, always useful, and a couple of camping lanterns. Small victories, but crucial ones. As we were about to leave, a low growl echoed from the back of the store. Every muscle in my body tensed. We froze, listening. It came again, closer this time, a deep guttural sound like a starving animal. "They're here," Elias whispered, gripping his shotgun. One of them must have been sheltering inside, away from the light. My blood ran cold. My theories about their nocturnal habits were proving accurate, but the reality of an encounter, even in daylight, was terrifying. This creature was likely weakened, sluggish, but still lethal. A shadow detached itself from the gloom of the back aisle. It was thin, almost skeletal, with long, unnaturally jointed limbs. Its eyes, even in the dim light of the store, glowed with that terrifying hunger. It moved with a slow, jerky gait, like a predator waking from a deep slumber, but its intent was clear. It had smelled us. "Stay together," I hissed, clutching my fire extinguisher. "Don't break formation." The creature shuffled forward, its head tilted, as if trying to discern our scent. It looked like a man, or what used to be a man, but warped, desiccated, a parody of human form. Its clothes hung loosely on its emaciated frame. Elias raised his shotgun, but hesitated. A shotgun blast would be deafening, attracting every other creature within a mile. It was a last resort. "If it gets too close, aim for the head," I yelled, recalling the single weakness from all the old stories. But was it true for these biological vampires? We were about to find out. The creature let out another growl, a wet, rasping sound, and lunged. It wasn't the blur of speed I'd seen downtown, but it was still shockingly fast. Elias fired. The shotgun roared, echoing deafeningly in the enclosed space. The creature stumbled, a cloud of dust and plaster erupting from the wall behind it. But it didn't fall. A large chunk of its shoulder was torn away, revealing glistening bone, but it seemed to feel no pain. It merely paused, its glowing eyes fixing on Elias with renewed fury. My hypothesis about their physiology slammed into reality. They weren't just undead, they were effectively immortal, or at least highly resilient. The wound on its shoulder began to visibly knit itself together, the sinews twitching, reforming, rapid regeneration. Another terrifying advantage. "It's regenerating!" Ben shouted, his voice filled with horror. "Head!" I screamed, realizing that if they were truly re-engineered, the only way to stop them might be to destroy the central control system, the brain. As the creature lunged again, I swung the fire extinguisher, aiming for its head. It ducked, but the heavy metal canister glanced off its jaw, sending it stumbling. Its head snapped back, revealing the monstrous, distended mouth, the serrated bones glinting. Ben, quick thinking, slammed his baseball bat into its knee. The creature's leg buckled, but again, it didn't break. The impact merely seemed to anger it further. The mother, Sarah, let out a terrified scream, drawing its attention. It pivoted, its glowing eyes locking onto her. "No!" I yelled, charging forward. I raised the fire extinguisher, not just as a weapon, but as a shield. As the creature spun toward Sarah, I slammed the heavy metal cylinder directly into its face. Not just a glancing blow, but a full, desperate, all-my-strength impact. There was a sickening crunch. The creature shrieked, a sound of agony and rage, and stumbled back. Its glowing eyes flickered, then dimmed, and it began to dissolve, turning to black ash even before it hit the ground. The sound, the high-pitched shriek, was unlike anything I had heard before. It was a sound of agony, of profound injury, but also of something deeply, cosmically wrong. It was a sound of unholy anguish, a testament to the destruction of its core being. And then it began to dissolve, not instantly, but rapidly. Its skin shriveled, turning gray, and then to a fine black dust that drifted to the floor. Its bones, previously so resilient, cracked and crumbled into powder. Within seconds, all that remained was a pile of black ash and a lingering metallic stench. We stared, dumbfounded, at the spot where it had been. The silence that followed was even more profound than before, broken only by our ragged breathing. It turned to dust," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "Like the stories—" "Head trauma," I said, trying to steady my own racing heart. "Direct, overwhelming trauma to the brain. It seems to be the only way to truly stop them. Their regenerative abilities are immense, but perhaps the brain, or whatever controls their new physiology, is the weak point. It's the central processing unit for this biological horror." It was a terrifying yet crucial discovery. They weren't invincible. They had a weakness, a fatal flaw. But finding a way to deliver that kind of lethal blow consistently, especially at night, against dozens, hundreds, thousands of them, was a monumental challenge. "We need to be faster," I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. "We need to get this radio working. We need information, and we need to find a way to get out of this city. The sun won't last forever." We gathered the supplies quickly, the grim encounter lending a new urgency to our movements. We loaded the ham radio and the solar panels onto my bicycle, securing them with duct tape. It was an unwieldy load, but necessary. The walk back to the park encampment was tense, every shadow scrutinized, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. The sun was noticeably lower in the sky now, casting long, unsettling shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the deserted streets. The air grew cooler, dropping into the low 60s Fahrenheit, the temperature they seemed to prefer. When we finally reached the barricade, the two guards breathed a visible sigh of relief. The other survivors looked at us, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. "We got them," I announced, gesturing to the radio and solar panels. "Now to get it working." Ben immediately set about connecting the solar panel to the battery, and then the battery to the radio, his mechanic's hands surprisingly adept with the unfamiliar electronics. The rest of us worked to reinforce the barricade, using whatever scraps of wood and metal we could find. The chilling encounter at the hardware store had hammered home the reality. Night was coming, and with it, the full force of their numbers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, the last vestiges of daylight faded. The city plunged into shadow, and a profound, bone-deep dread settled over the encampment. We could hear them now, a faint, distant hum growing louder with each passing minute. The sound of a city awakening, not to life, but to a hunt. Ben finally connected the last wire. The ham radio, old and dusty, hummed to life, its dials faintly glowing. Static filled the air, a cacophony of white noise. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to control it. "Let's see if anyone out there is listening." I began to tune the dials, slowly, methodically, searching for a signal, any signal, in the vast, silent wasteland of a dying world. The night pressed in, dark and cold, filled with the unseen horrors that now stalked the streets of Seattle. The chilling survival story was only just beginning, and the true test of our resilience, our humanity, was about to begin. The ham radio crackled with static, a disheartening roar in the oppressive silence of the night. I meticulously swept through the frequencies, my fingers aching from the effort, my ears straining for any whisper of a human voice, any sign that we weren't entirely alone. Elias sat beside me, his shotgun resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond our flimsy barricade. The others huddled together, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a scavenged lantern, their fear a palpable presence in the cool night air. The temperature had dropped sharply, hovering around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, a prime operating temperature for the creatures, it seemed. Their low hum, that persistent, unsettling vibration, was louder now, a constant reminder of their proximity. Sometimes a distant shriek would tear through the air, a sound that made every hair on my arms stand on end, a grim symphony of the hunt. Hours passed. My hope, which had flared so brightly with the discovery of the radio, began to wane. Was the entire world gone? Was Seattle just an isolated pocket of apocalypse? The thought was chilling, far more terrifying than the immediate threat of the creatures outside. Solitude in this new world was a death sentence. Just as despair began to settle heavy on my shoulders, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the static, a rhythm, a pattern. My heart leaped. "Wait," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "There's something." I fine-tuned the dial, my breath held. The static diminished, replaced by a garbled, broken sequence of sounds. It was Morse code, faint, erratic, but undeniably there. My grandfather's old lessons, long forgotten, surged back. Da-dit-da-dit, dit-dit-dit-da. My mind raced, trying to translate the fragmented message. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but a message was indeed being sent. And wine, E.T. It was a desperate plea, an echo of our own. My hands shook as I grabbed the microphone. "This is Survivor 1703 in Seattle," I broadcast, my voice barely a whisper against the static. "Do you copy? Is anyone out there?" More static. Then a hesitant, slightly clearer burst of Morse code. SEATTHISISBELOGANDETRYED. Base Logan. That was an army base to the south, near Fort Lewis. Destroyed? The implications hit me like a physical blow. If a military base, likely heavily armed and fortified, had fallen, what hope did scattered civilians have? I replied, my voice now filled with urgency. "Base Logan, confirmed destruction. What happened? Who is this?" A pause. Then the Morse code again, faster this time, more desperate. WEWEREFIFTYMLESSOUEEHOFSEATHEACHEONEHERE. The realization slammed into me. The outbreak wasn't confined to Seattle. It was widespread. It was an epidemic, or rather a pandemic of a new, horrifying kind. The military had been overwhelmed, their conventional weapons useless against the rapid transformation and regeneration of these creatures. The sheer scale of the disaster was unfathomable. THEATESUNLIGTFIRENETIREUES. My breath hitched. Fire. Another weakness. It made sense. If their biology was hypersensitive to UV, then intense heat, like that produced by fire, could also destabilize their re-engineered cells. This was crucial. This was actionable intelligence. I quickly broadcast back. "Copy that. Sunlight, fire, head trauma. Any other intel? Are there any safe zones? Is anyone fighting back?" A long silence. The static returned, louder now, almost mocking. Had I lost the signal? Had they been silenced? Then a faint, almost inaudible voice, not Morse code, but human. It was strained, distorted, barely audible through the crackle. "This is Sergeant Miller, Base Logan. We were trying to evacuate, but they just kept coming, too many. The civilians, oh God, the civilians. There's no escape. They're faster, stronger. They can't be reasoned with." The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a sudden, sickening shriek, closer than before, then a gurgling sound, and then nothing but static. The radio had gone dead. My hand still gripped the microphone, my knuckles white. Sergeant Miller, he had confirmed it. The creatures were everywhere. The scale of the outbreak was truly global, or at least national, and the military, the last bastion of order, had fallen. Elias looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. "What happened? What did they say?" I recounted the message, my voice hollow. The destruction of Base Logan, the widespread nature of the outbreak, the confirmation of their weaknesses, sunlight, fire, and catastrophic head trauma, and the chilling end to Sergeant Miller's transmission. A collective gasp went through the huddle of survivors. The fragile hope we had clung to, the idea that this was just a local crisis, shattered around us. The dread deepened, settling into a cold, aching despair. "So no help is coming," Ben whispered, his face pale. "Not from the military," I confirmed. "It's just us. We're on our own." But Sergeant Miller's last words had also given us something. Not hope for rescue, but tools for survival. Fire. "We need fire," I declared, my voice gaining a new strength, a new purpose born of desperation. "Not just for light, but as a weapon. We need to set up watchtowers, create fire barriers, and we need to conserve every ounce of gasoline, every flammable material we can find." Elias nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "All right, we'll start tomorrow, in the daylight. But tonight," he gestured to the surrounding darkness, "tonight, we just survive." The rest of the night was a tense vigil. Every shadow beyond the barricade seemed to shift, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. The creatures, unseen but ever present, continued their terrifying hum. We heard more screams from distant parts of the city, isolated, desperate cries that were quickly snuffed out. The dread was a physical presence, a cold hand gripping my throat. My mind, however, was already racing, analyzing the new information. Fire, the mechanics of it. These creatures, these re-engineered organisms, were highly efficient biological machines. If fire could destroy them, it implied a vulnerability to heat that could denature their specialized proteins or enzymes, perhaps even cause their hyper-efficient circulatory systems to rupture. It was a brutal but effective solution. The psychological toll of that night was immense. The knowledge that the world had truly ended, that rescue was not coming, was a heavier burden than any immediate physical threat. My personal conflicts, my aspirations, my hopes for a normal future, all were now meaningless. All that mattered was the present moment, the next breath, the next sunrise. I had to push away the grief, the fear, the existential dread, and focus purely on the tactical. As the first hint of pre-dawn gray lightened the sky, the pervasive hum of the creatures began to recede. Their movements grew less frequent, their shrieks more distant. The temperature started to rise, climbing back into the low 60s Fahrenheit. They were returning to their hidden lairs, retreating from the encroaching sun. The relief that washed over us was like a physical wave. We had survived the second night, but the cost was heavy. The survivors were exhausted, their eyes hollow, their faces etched with the strain of constant vigilance. "All right," Elias said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Daylight. Let's make it count." Our new mission for the day was clear. Fortify, scavenge, and prepare for the next night. We needed to make this small park encampment a true stronghold, not just a temporary refuge. We started by tearing down the wooden picnic tables and benches, using the planks to reinforce the barricade. We built it higher, thicker, trying to make it impenetrable. Ben, with his mechanic's ingenuity, found some discarded metal shelving from a nearby store and began to weld them into spikes using a portable oxyacetylene torch he'd miraculously salvaged. It was noisy work, but the clatter of metal against metal was a welcome antidote to the oppressive silence. I organized small scavenging parties, not for food or water, but specifically for fuel, for anything flammable. Old tires, kerosene, lighter fluid, anything that could feed a fire. We also needed more robust weapons. The baseball bats and wrenches were barely adequate. I led a small group to a nearby sporting goods store. It too was ransacked, but we found a few items. A couple of compound bows, some arrows, though I had no idea how to use them effectively, and most importantly, some heavy-duty aluminum baseball bats, far more durable than wood. And in the camping section, a few hatchets and a couple of machetes. Primitive, but effective. We also looked for anything that could act as a deterrent or a distraction. Flares, bear spray, anything that could buy us precious seconds. We found a few cans of bear spray, their chemical contents potentially irritating to the creature's enhanced senses. As we scavenged, I began to notice patterns. They weren't just random monsters. They seemed to leave certain areas undisturbed, particularly those with dense human populations, as if they were saving them for a later harvest. And they seemed to have established specific nesting areas, often in multi-story parking garages, abandoned commercial buildings, or even subway tunnels, places where they could be shielded from the sun. These were the places to avoid at all costs. The investigation into the outbreak became a grim necessity, an intellectual exercise in survival. Understanding their behavior, their vulnerabilities, their patterns, it was the only way to gain an edge. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about outsmarting. We returned to the park in the late afternoon, laden with our grim trophies. The encampment looked more formidable now, the barricades higher, the spiked fences gleaming menacingly in the fading sunlight. A central fire pit had been dug, and piles of scavenged wood and fuel were stacked nearby. As its final descent, painting the western sky in hues of deep violet and fiery red, we gathered around the fire pit. The air grew colder, dropping to the low 50s Fahrenheit, the signal for their awakening. We lit the fire, the flames leaping skyward, casting dancing shadows on our weary faces. It was a primal comfort, a defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness and the unseen horrors it held. The warmth was a physical barrier against the cold, and the light, a symbolic defiance against the overwhelming darkness. Elias, his face illuminated by the firelight, looked around at the small group of survivors. "We survived another day," he said, his voice quiet, "and we're stronger now. We have fire, we have a plan, we have each other." My gaze drifted beyond the flickering light, into the encroaching gloom. The hum was back, louder now, a symphony of dread. But this time it felt different. Not quite as overwhelming. We had information, we had weapons, we had a strategy. The fight had changed. It was no longer just about fleeing, it was about holding our ground, about defying the inevitable. The night was upon us, but this time we would meet it with fire and steel, armed with the terrible knowledge of our enemy. The fire burned bright, its warmth a deceptive comfort against the creeping chill of the night. The temperature had settled around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal hunting conditions for the creatures. Their pervasive hum was a physical thrum now, vibrating in the very air around us. We could hear their movements, a distant skittering on asphalt, the faint scraping of claws against concrete. They were circling, testing our defenses, an unseen tide of hunger pressing against our fragile sanctuary. Elias had organized shifts, 2 people on watch at all times, their eyes scanning the dark perimeter beyond the firelight, their makeshift weapon in nervous hands. I was on the first watch, alongside a young woman named Clara, who had been a barista before the world ended. Her eyes, wide with fear, reflected the dancing flames. "Do you really think the fire will keep them away?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling wood. "Sergeant Miller said fire was a weakness," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And the one at the hardware store, it dissolved. The heat must disrupt their re-engineered cellular structure. It's like a biological overload, causing a rapid, catastrophic breakdown." The logic was sound, scientifically. If their metabolic processes were tuned to cooler temperatures and their rapid regeneration relied on specific enzymatic reactions, then sustained, intense heat would surely destabilize them. It was a theory born of observation and a desperate need for answers. But knowing something intellectually and facing it in the dark were 2 different things. Every shadow seemed to stretch and contort into grotesque shapes. My senses were on high alert, straining to detect any movement, any sound that was not the wind or the fire. The dread was a knot in my stomach, a cold, leaden weight. Suddenly a low growl, closer this time, pierced the night. It emanated from the dark grove of trees beyond the barricade, a deep guttural sound that raised the hairs on my neck. "Movement!" Clara hissed, her voice trembling. She pointed with a shaking finger. 3 of them emerged from the tree line, their glowing eyes like malevolent embers in the darkness. They were faster than the one in the hardware store, their movements less sluggish, their lean forms barely visible against the dark foliage. They seemed to move with a coordinated, predatory grace, like wolves stalking their prey. They stopped at the edge of the firelight, their forms indistinct, but their hunger palpable. They hesitated, their heads cocked, as if confused or wary of the fire. "Hold!" Elias's voice, calm despite the tension, carried from the center of the camp. "Let them come closer. Don't waste shots." The creatures remained stationary for a moment. Then one of them, larger than the others, let out a piercing shriek. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a high-pitched, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. A command, a challenge. And then they lunged. Not directly at the fire, but attempting to flank us, using the darker edges of the park to bypass the main flame. "To the sides! They're flanking!" I yelled, grabbing one of the aluminum bats. 2 of them veered right, towards a less fortified section of the barricade. The third, the larger one, charged directly at the fire, as if testing its boundaries. My mind raced. This wasn't random. Their intelligence, their coordination was undeniable. They were learning, adapting. As the flanking creatures closed in, the other survivors, armed with whatever they could find, rakes, shovels, even sharpened broom handles, scrambled to reinforce the threatened sections. Elias, with his shotgun, positioned himself to cover the largest gap. The creature charging the fire paused at its edge, its eyes narrowed, a guttural snarl escaping its lips. It was almost as if it was taunting us, daring us to believe our meager fire could truly stop it. Then, with a terrifying burst of speed, it sprang over a low section of the barricade, landing with a sickening thud within the perimeter. It ignored the fire, its focus entirely on the nearest human, Ben, who was trying to light a makeshift torch. "Ben, watch out!" I screamed. The creature was on him in an instant, a blur of motion. Ben barely turned before the creature slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its distended mouth opened, revealing the serrated bone, moving towards Ben's exposed throat. I reacted instinctively. I charged, not thinking about my own safety, only about Ben. With all my might, I swung the aluminum bat, aiming for its head. The creature, focused on Ben, didn't see me coming. The bat connected with a sickening crack, directly against its temple. The force of the blow was immense. I felt the vibration travel up my arms. The creature shrieked, a sound of agony and rage, and stumbled back. Its glowing eyes flickered, then dimmed, and it began to dissolve, turning to black ash even before it hit the ground. I stood over the dissipating pile of dust, my chest heaving, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Ben, pale and shaken, scrambled to his feet. You saved me," he stammered, his eyes wide. "No time," I gasped, pointing towards the flanks. "They're still out there." The other 2 creatures were relentless, tearing at the barricades, their unnatural strength evident as they ripped away planks of wood. The sounds of splintering timber and frustrated snarls filled the night. Elias fired his shotgun, a roar that briefly illuminated the darkness, sending one of the creatures reeling back. But it quickly recovered, already regenerating, another reminder of their horrifying resilience. We needed more fire, quickly. "More fuel! Light the perimeter!" I yelled, remembering Sergeant Miller's warning about fire. It wasn't just a weakness, it was a deterrent. The survivors scrambled, throwing more wood and scavenged materials onto the fire pit, sending sparks showering into the night. Others, with the makeshift torches Ben had managed to light, began to spread the flames along the outer edge of the barricade, setting small piles of scavenged tires and debris ablaze. The heat intensified. The creatures, snarling in frustration, retreated from the growing inferno. They hated the heat. It was clear. The flames, even small ones, seemed to cause them distress, their movements becoming more erratic, less coordinated. We had created a fiery perimeter, a temporary wall of light and heat against the encroaching darkness. They continued to circle, their low hum now laced with what sounded like frustrated growls. They were trapped outside our ring of fire. The first stand was successful. We had defended our ground, but the victory felt hollow. We had learned more about them, their intelligence, their coordination, their uncanny regenerative abilities, and the undeniable fact that a direct blow to the head was the only way to truly stop them. And fire, a powerful deterrent and a means of dispatching them once incapacitated. But we also learned about our own fragility. We were few, poorly armed, and constantly on the brink of exhaustion, and they were many. So many. As the night wore on, the hum of the creatures outside never truly subsided. It was a constant low thrum, a reminder that they were out there, waiting, watching. The temperature slowly dropped to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, making our fire a necessity for warmth as well as defense. The survivors took turns sleeping, one eye always open, one ear always listening. My personal conflict re-emerged in the quiet moments of my watch, the weight of responsibility. I was not a leader, not a soldier. I was just a former office worker, a data analyst. But now, these people looked to me for answers, for guidance. The burden was immense, and the fear of failure, the fear of leading them to their deaths, was a heavy cross to bear. But there was no turning back. This was my new reality, my new purpose. As the first hint of pre-dawn light began to paint the eastern sky, a new sound reached us. Faint at first, then growing louder. Not the hum of the creatures, not the crackle of fire. It was the distinct sound of a helicopter. My heart leaped. Had the military not been completely destroyed? Was help finally coming? The others heard it too. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in their weary eyes. They stumbled to their feet, scanning the skies. The sound grew louder, closer. A deep thrumming that seemed to shake the very air. Then a dark silhouette appeared against the lightening sky, a large, heavy-lift helicopter, flying low and fast. It wasn't a rescue helicopter. It was too fast, too low, too military. As it passed over our position, the ground shook, and then a series of explosions. Not from the helicopter, but from behind it, from the direction of downtown Seattle. Massive earth blasts that sent plumes of smoke and debris into the sky. The helicopter continued its flight, a solitary, grim herald of something terrible. It was dropping something, not bombs, but something else. It was too fast to tell. And then, the radio, which I had kept tuned, crackled to life with a single, garbled transmission, barely audible over the distant explosions. DISEASECTAMTPROL SINTIEETEATA OOCKDENOENTRYNOEXVNTTE ARTHPOLACTIVATED. The transmission cut off, leaving only static. My blood ran cold. Lockdown zone, burnt earth protocol, the explosions. They weren't rescuing us. They were isolating us, eradicating the infection and everyone in it. Seattle wasn't just infested, it was condemned. The helicopter continued its flight, then banked sharply, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. The explosions continued, a horrifying rhythmic beat against the fading night. They were bombing the city. Our city. Elias looked at me, his face a mask of dawning horror. What was that? What did they say? I couldn't speak for a moment, the words caught in my throat. When I finally found my voice, it was barely a whisper. They're not coming for us. They're containing it. They're burning Seattle to the ground. The dread that had been a constant companion now solidified into a crushing despair. We weren't just fighting monsters, we were fighting against our own government, against the very people who were supposed to protect us. The terrifying truth was that we were on our own, abandoned, sacrificial lambs in a city-wide extermination. The chilling survival story had taken an even darker, more desperate turn. We were trapped. The explosions continued throughout the morning, a relentless, earth-shattering percussion that vibrated through the very ground beneath our feet. Plumes of black smoke rose into the sky, painting the dawn a sickly, apocalyptic gray. The air grew heavy with the stench of burning buildings, of destruction, of death. The temperature, usually a mild 65 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-morning, was now rising steadily, fueled by the spreading inferno. The initial shock of the burnt earth protocol wore off, replaced by a cold, searing rage. They had abandoned us, condemned us. The very government meant to protect its citizens had decided that Seattle and everyone in it was expendable. The personal conflict within me, the struggle between hope and despair, now tilted irrevocably towards a grim determination. If they wanted us gone, they'd have to work for it. Elias, Ben, Clara, and the rest of the survivors were shattered. Their faces, already pale with fear and exhaustion, now reflected a profound sense of betrayal. The children clung to their parents, whimpering, confused by the constant thunder. "They're burning the city," Elias whispered, his voice hollow. "Trying to burn them out, and us with them." "It's a desperate measure," I explained, trying to process the horrifying logic. "If the HaemovoricSyndrome is as aggressive and self-replicating as it appears, and has spread beyond control, a burnt earth strategy would be their last resort. It's a form of extreme sterilization, sacrificing the infected area to save the uninfected. Scientifically, fire is effective against their cellular structure, as we observed. From a military strategic standpoint, it's a horrific but perhaps unavoidable decision to prevent a global pandemic." The cold clinical explanation offered no comfort. It merely highlighted the brutal calculus of survival on a national scale. We were statistics, variables in a terrifying equation. The heat, however, presented a new, paradoxical problem. While the rising temperatures kept the creatures largely at bay, retreating deeper into the remaining shadows, seeking refuge in sewers and basements, it also made our immediate surroundings increasingly unbearable. The smoke stung our eyes, and the air became thick with ash. We were trapped between the burning city and the relentless, regenerating monsters. "We can't stay here," Clara said, coughing. "The smoke, it's too much." "No," I agreed, "we need to move, but where and how?" The bridges out of Seattle were already compromised, either destroyed by the creatures or clogged by abandoned vehicles. The military's aerial assault was likely targeting remaining choke points, to ensure no one or nothing escaped. Our only viable option was to find an alternate route out of the city, or to find a more defensible, less smoke-filled location within it. My gaze turned towards the water. Lake Union, Puget Sound. The city was surrounded by water. Water offered a unique form of barrier, one the creatures seemed to avoid. Their physiology, perhaps, made them denser than water, or the constant exposure to water might interfere with their specific biological functions, especially if they had highly specialized skin or respiratory structures. "The docks," I suggested, pointing vaguely towards the west. "If we can reach the waterfront, maybe we can find a boat. Something to get across the water, away from the burning city, away from them." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. The docks would be heavily infested, a prime hunting ground due to their proximity to densely populated areas and the chaos of the ferry terminal. But it was our only hope. We packed our meager belongings, the ham radio, the solar panels, the batteries, the remaining food, and our makeshift weapons. The baseball bats, the wrench, the hatchets, and the remaining bear spray. Every item was a precious commodity. The journey began. We moved slowly, deliberately, a small, fearful procession making its way through the burning, ruined city. The sounds of explosions continued, receding slightly as we moved west, but still a constant, terrifying reminder. The urban landscape was a nightmare made real. Collapsed buildings, smoldering wreckage, the eerie silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant, mournful cries of abandoned sirens. We encountered pockets of creatures, mostly sheltering in the deepest shadows of alleys or within the skeletal remains of buildings. They were sluggish in the heat and avoided the direct sunlight, but still dangerous if provoked. We gave them a wide berth, using our knowledge of their weaknesses to our advantage. The machetes and hatchets were now our primary close-quarters weapons, quiet and capable of delivering the necessary head trauma if we were forced to engage. As we navigated the labyrinthine streets, I observed more about the creatures' behavior. They seemed to possess a rudimentary, hive-like intelligence. They communicated not with language, but with those high-pitched shrieks and low growls, signals that coordinated their movements, their hunts. It was a terrifying efficiency, a collective predatory instinct. This wasn't just a random spread of infection. It was an organized biological takeover. The city, once a symbol of human ingenuity and progress, was now a monument to our fragility. The sheer speed of its collapse was staggering. A few days, and a thriving metropolis was reduced to ash and monstrous predators. It truly was the end of the world as we knew it. My personal conflict, the lingering echo of my old life, faded further with each step. The familiar landmarks, the streets I had walked countless times, were now unrecognizable, warped by fire and destruction. It was a psychological severing, a forced acceptance of the new, brutal reality. We reached the waterfront in the late afternoon. The scene was even more devastating than downtown. The piers were largely destroyed, many of the ferry boats either sunk or burning. The air here was thick with the smell of brine and charred wood. And they were everywhere. Even in the heat, the sheer number of creatures sheltering beneath the piers, within the gutted warehouses, and along the shadowed edges of the docks, was overwhelming. The proximity to the water, perhaps, offered a cooler, more humid environment, making it a desirable nesting ground. Their low hum was louder here, a constant, sickening drone. My heart sank. This wasn't going to be easy. "We need to find a boat," I said, my voice barely audible over the crackling flames of a distant warehouse. "Any boat, even a small one." We moved along the shattered docks, peering into every abandoned boat slip, every half-sunken vessel. Most were either too damaged, too large to move, or clearly infested. The hopelessness gnawed at me. Then Ben spotted it. Tucked away in a dark, less damaged slip, a small, privately owned fishing boat. It looked sturdy, about 20 feet long, and most importantly, it floated. Its name, faded by sun and salt, was the Seeker. A fitting name, given our desperate quest. "There," Ben exclaimed, pointing. "A boat! Looks intact!" We rushed towards it, hope surging through me. But as we got closer, we saw the problem. A horde of the creatures were gathered on the pier next to it, sheltering in the deep shadows cast by a collapsed crane. They were feasting on something, their guttural growls and slurping sounds echoing eerily in the humid air. They were too many, and they were guarding the only path to the boat. "How do we get past them?" Clara whispered, her face pale. My mind raced. We had fire. We had their weakness. But this was a large group. We couldn't just charge in. "Diversion," I said, looking around. "We need a massive distraction. Something to draw them away, or to drive them into the open where the sun can hit them." My gaze fell on a stack of highly flammable shipping crates, soaked with some kind of oil, near the edge of the pier, and beyond them a huge fuel tank, connected to a disused pump. An idea, reckless and dangerous, began to form in my mind. A controlled explosion. Not to destroy them, but to scare them, to scatter them, to create a momentary path to the Seeker. "The fuel tank," I said, pointing. "If we can ignite that, the explosion and the fire, it will drive them off, or at least give us a window." Elias looked at me, his eyes wide. "That's insane. It'll be a massive explosion. We could all be killed." "It's a calculated risk," I countered, my voice firm. "We're trapped. This is our only way out. We create enough fire, enough heat, enough light to overwhelm them. And we move fast." The plan was simple in its audacity. Ben, with his knowledge of engines and fuel lines, would try to jury-rig a way to ignite the tank from a distance. Elias and I would provide cover, drawing any attention away from him. The others would wait, ready to rush for the boat the moment the explosion occurred. As Ben worked, his hands trembling but steady, the sun began to dip towards the horizon. The air grew cooler, dropping to 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The creatures on the pier grew more agitated, their hum intensifying, their movements becoming more restless. Night was coming. "Hurry, Ben," Clara urged, her voice tight with fear. Finally, Ben straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's rigged," he announced. "A small charge. It should cause enough of a spark to ignite the vapors. We need to be clear of here when it blows." "Everyone, get ready," I yelled. "The moment it blows, rush the boat. Don't hesitate. Don't look back." The sun touched the horizon, casting the docks in a final eerie glow. The creatures stirred, their predatory eyes fixed on us. They sensed our desperation, our intent. "Now, Ben," I shouted. Ben triggered the remote. For a moment, nothing happened. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had it failed? Then, with a deafening roar, the fuel tank exploded. A massive fireball erupted, tearing through the twilight, sending a wave of searing heat and light across the docks. The air filled with the smell of burning fuel and the terrifying, high-pitched shrieks of the creatures. They scattered, blinded and disoriented by the sudden intense light and heat, dissolving into black ash as the flames consumed them. "Go, go, go!" Elias roared, pushing us forward. We ran, a desperate, terrified sprint through the raining debris and the dying echoes of the explosion. The heat was immense, the light blinding, but it was our salvation. We reached the seeker. Ben, despite his shaking hands, quickly started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, then roared to life, a defiant sound against the backdrop of the burning city. As the boat pulled away from the pier, I looked back. Seattle, my home, was a city in flames. Pillars of smoke reached for the sky, illuminated by the orange glow of the inferno below. The terrifying hum of the creatures was still there, but receding now, swallowed by the roar of the fire and the chugging of our engine. We had escaped, but to what? The sea was vast and our future uncertain. The chilling survival story had just entered a new watery chapter, leaving behind the burning remains of our old world. But the monsters, the HaemovoricSyndrome carriers, they were still out there, waiting, multiplying. And we knew, with a terrifying certainty, that our escape was only temporary. The fight was far from over. The journey across Puget Sound was agonizingly slow. The small fishing boat, the Seeker, chugged steadily through the dark water, its engine a monotonous thrum against the vast silence. Behind us, Seattle blazed, a horrifying beacon in the night. The sky, for miles around, was painted orange by the inferno, and the smell of smoke and charred remains clung to the air, even miles offshore. The temperature, a cool 50 degrees Fahrenheit, offered no comfort against the chill of the terrifying reality we were now adrift in. The survivors huddled together, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the boat's navigation lights. Exhaustion and shock etched every face. Clara nursed her child, its whimpers a mournful accompaniment to the engine. Elias sat at the stern, his shotgun across his knees, his gaze fixed on the burning city, a silent sentinel against a nightmare. My mind, despite the exhaustion, raced, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the global response. Burnt Earth Protocol. It suggested a desperate, last-ditch effort. The military, unable to contain the outbreak on the ground, had resorted to aerial bombardment and containment. This implied that the creature's spread was too rapid, their numbers too vast for conventional warfare. Fire was their only weapon against an enemy that regenerated from bullet wounds and spread with a single bite. The fact that they were burning such a major city, without warning, without evacuation, spoke volumes about the perceived threat. It meant the infection was considered incurable, irreversible, and highly infectious. From a biological standpoint, the lack of a known cure for haemovoric syndrome, coupled with its rapid progression and extreme lethality, would leave very few options for governments beyond complete eradication of the infected zones. It was a cold, brutal decision, but perhaps one made out of sheer desperation. We aimed for Bainbridge Island, a large, mostly residential island about 5 miles west of Seattle. It was a gamble. It might be infested, or it might be another containment zone, but it was our best bet for now. Land, safety, a place to regroup and reassess. As we sailed, the silence of the water was broken only by the boat's engine and the distant, almost imperceptible screams carried on the wind from the burning city. The dread was a constant companion, a heavy cloak draped over us all. This wasn't just a survival story, it was a story of profound loss, of a world irrevocably changed. The first rays of dawn touched the eastern horizon, painting the sky with bruised purples and blood oranges. The sight of Seattle, still burning, was a horrifying tableau. But the sunlight also brought a measure of relief. The creatures, wherever they were, would be retreating. We reached Bainbridge Island shortly after sunrise. The island looked eerily peaceful from the water, its green forests and quiet shorelines a stark contrast to the inferno we had left behind. But peace was deceptive. We found a small, secluded cove, pulling the boat onto the shore. The crunch of the keel on the sand was deafening in the silence. We disembarked, our legs wobbly after hours on the water. The air on the island was fresher, cleaner, largely free of the smoke from Seattle, but the silence was unnerving. Too silent, no bird song, no distant traffic, only the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "We need to find a defensible position," I said, scanning the tree line. "Somewhere elevated, with a good view, and somewhere to resupply." We moved cautiously, making our way through the dense undergrowth. The island was beautiful, but felt ominous. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig sent a jolt of fear through us. We found a small, abandoned park ranger station, perched on a hill overlooking the sound. It was structurally sound, with a small cabin and an observation tower. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. The station had clearly been abandoned in a hurry. A half-eaten meal sat on a table, a map of the island pinned to the wall, and best of all, a functional, albeit dusty generator in a small shed outside. Ben immediately set about getting the generator running. With fuel, we could power lights, charge our radio, and even boil. Simple luxuries that now felt like unimaginable blessings. As Ben tinkered with the generator, I examined the map of the island. It showed hiking trails, small communities, and even a few isolated cabins. My eyes scanned for any points of interest, any signs of life. And then I saw it, marked on the map, a small faded symbol, a research facility, tucked away deep in the island's interior, near a large, heavily forested area. My heart pounded. A research facility. Could it be related to the outbreak? Could it hold answers, or even a cure? My scientific curiosity, long suppressed by the sheer terror of survival, resurfaced. This was a mystery, an investigation waiting to happen. The possibility, however remote, that this facility held the key to understanding, or even reversing, the HaemovoricSyndrome was a powerful motivator. My personal conflict with the overwhelming hopelessness of the situation now had a new direction, a new focus. "Look," I said to Elias, pointing to the map. "A research facility. It's deep in the interior. It could be nothing, or it could be everything." Elias looked at the map, then at me. "You think it's connected to all this?" "Maybe," I admitted. "The speed of the outbreak, the re-engineering of human cells, it's too precise, too efficient to be a natural evolution. It almost feels engineered, a pathogen designed for rapid spread and conversion." The thought was chilling. If it was engineered, then someone, somewhere, had created this nightmare. A bioweapon gone horribly wrong. Elias considered this, then nodded. "All right, but we go in force, and we go careful. We don't know what's waiting for us there." Our immediate tasks: secure the ranger station, gather supplies, and charge the ham radio. The generator roared to life, a comforting sound of mechanical efficiency. We had power. While Ben charged the radio, Elias and I scouted the immediate area around the ranger station. We found a small cache of canned goods, some fishing supplies, and a surprisingly intact first aid kit. Small victories, but crucial for our long-term survival. The temperature was now a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the creatures at bay. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the island, a new concern arose. The hum. It was fainter here, but still present, a low, almost subliminal vibration in the air. This meant they were on the island, not in the same overwhelming numbers as Seattle, but they were here, and night was coming. We reinforced the ranger station, boarding up windows, clearing lines of sight. We positioned the few remaining gas cans and flammable materials near the entrances. ready to ignite a fire barrier if needed. The lesson from Seattle was clear. Fire was our best defense. The radio finally crackled to life, charged and ready. I tried the last known frequency from Sergeant Miller, but it was dead, just static. The military base was truly gone. I began to sweep through other emergency frequencies, hoping to catch any government broadcast, any whisper of a response from the outside world. And then a new voice, not Morse code but a human voice, faint but clear. "This is civilian band. Is anyone out there? Repeat, is anyone out there? We are survivors in Montana Bozeman. Outbreak contained here with extreme measures, seeking other survivors." My heart leaped. Montana, not wiped out, an outbreak contained, a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread connecting us to a world that still existed. "This is Survivor Group Seattle," I broadcast, my voice filled with a desperate urgency. "We are on Bainbridge Island. Seattle has fallen. Confirm extreme measures. What happened in Bozeman?" A pause. Then the voice, clearer this time. "Seattle, my God. We thought everyone there was lost. This is Big Sky Survivors in Bozeman. The extreme measures involved a tactical nuclear strike, limited yield, targeted. The infection was spreading too fast. It was the only way to sterilize the area and prevent further spread." The words hit me like a physical blow. Tactical nuclear strike. Not just fire, but atomic fire. The ultimate burnt earth protocol. My mind reeled, the horror of it, the terrifying finality. This was the true nature of their containment. Not just Seattle, but other major outbreak zones had been cleansed with nuclear fire. The thought was sickening, but also offered a horrifying explanation for the scale of the silence across the frequencies. "Are there any other safe zones?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Any unaffected areas?" "We don't know," the voice replied, tinged with exhaustion. "Communication is limited. We're operating on a shoestring. What's your situation? Are you safe? Do you have any intel on the creatures?" I recounted our experiences in Seattle, the rapid spread of HaemovoricSyndrome, their weaknesses, sunlight, fire, head trauma, and our theory of their advanced biological reengineering. I told them about the Seeker, our escape across Puget Sound, and our current location on Bainbridge Island. The Bozeman Survivor Group listened, their occasional grunts and whispers audible over the radio. "Your intel on their biology is crucial," the voice replied. "Matches our observations. They're not just blood drinkers, they're a new apex predator. We've been trying to reverse engineer a counteragent based on their genetic makeup, but it's slow going. There's a research facility on your island, you say? That could be invaluable. Any data, any samples, could turn the tide." My earlier thought about the research facility on Bainbridge Island returned with renewed urgency. This wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was a mission, a potentially world-saving mission. "We saw a research facility on our map," I confirmed. "We plan to investigate it tomorrow. We'll report back what we find." "Be careful," the voice warned. "These things are cunning. They learn, and they are relentless. Good luck, Seattle. We'll be listening." The connection faded, leaving only the reassuring static. We had found a connection, a thread of hope. But the price of that hope was horrifying. Tactical nuclear strikes. The world was not just fighting a monster. It was willing to sacrifice itself, to tear itself apart to survive. Night fell completely, plunging the island into darkness. The air grew colder, dropping to 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The hum of the creatures intensified, closer now, a constant, chilling reminder that even here, on this seemingly peaceful island, we were hunted. But this time, the dread was tempered by a new resolve. We had a mission, investigation, a purpose beyond mere survival, the research facility. It held the promise of answers, of a future, however distant. The chilling survival story had transformed into a desperate quest for knowledge, a race against time, and a fight against not just the monsters, but against the despair of a world that had seemingly abandoned us to our fate. The morning on Bainbridge Island dawned with a heavy mist, shrouding the forests in an eerie, ghostly veil. The air was cool, around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. The creatures, the HaemovoricSyndrome carriers, seemed to be less active in these conditions, preferring the drier, denser shadows. Their hum was present, but subdued, a distant thrum that hinted at their presence rather than broadcasting it. Our objective for the day was clear: the research facility. It was our only lead, our only hope for understanding and perhaps for a solution. Elias, Ben, Clara, and I formed the expedition party. The others, the elderly and the very young, remained at the ranger station, protected by our rudimentary defenses and the hope of daylight. We moved cautiously through the mist-shrouded forest, our senses on high alert. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of our boots on fallen leaves and the distant, mournful cry of an unseen bird. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat. Every rustle of the undergrowth sent a jolt of fear through us. The dread was a constant companion, a cold hand gripping my heart. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. What kind of research facility was this? Why was it so isolated? And what exactly had it been studying before the world dissolved into this nightmare? Was it a pharmaceutical company, a genetic research lab, or something more clandestine, more sinister? The thought of a deliberately engineered plague gnawed at me, a personal conflict between scientific curiosity and profound moral revulsion. The coordinates on the map led us deeper into the forest, away from any discernible trails. The vegetation grew thicker, the trees taller and more ancient, blocking out much of the already diffused sunlight. The air grew colder, dropping to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the dense canopy. Then through the mist, a glimpse of something unnatural, a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, barely visible amidst the trees. Beyond it, a concrete wall. And then a low, sprawling building made of gray concrete and steel, its windows dark and opaque, the research facility. It looked like a bunker, designed for secrecy, not for public display. We approached the main gate. It was heavily secured, a double fence with a formidable steel gate, but it was also breached. A section of the fence was bent inward, as if something immense had crashed through it, and the gate itself was twisted, ripped from its hinges. Whatever happened here, it happened violently. The air around the breach was thick with that acrid metallic stench, the smell of the creatures. This facility was not untouched. We entered the compound, our weapons at the ready. The interior grounds were overgrown, with weeds pushing through cracks in the asphalt. Abandoned vehicles, some military, some civilian, were scattered haphazardly, their doors open, their tires slashed. It looked like a battlefield, a silent testament to a desperate struggle. The main entrance to the building was a reinforced steel door, now dented and scarred, but still stubbornly shut. Another clue. Whatever had breached the outer defenses hadn't gotten through here, or if it hadn't left a visible entry point. We searched for another way in. Around the back, we found a service entrance, equally reinforced, but with a small rectangular vent grating near the bottom. Too small for a person, but perhaps not for some of the creatures in their most emaciated state. Or maybe this was how they got in after the fact. Ben, ever the pragmatist, inspected the steel door. "Looks like it's been sealed from the inside," he muttered, running his hand over a series of heavy-duty bolts. "Blast-proof, probably. Whoever was inside was trying to keep something out, or in." My heart pounded with a mix of dread and anticipation. If it was sealed from the inside, there might be survivors, or, far more likely, research data. We searched for an emergency override, a keypad, anything. My gaze fell on a small, discreet panel near the doorframe, a biometric scanner, fingerprint, iris. This place was high security. My mind flashed back to the intelligence from Bozeman. Reverse engineer a counteragent. This facility, if it was indeed connected to the outbreak, could hold the key. Then Elias noticed something. A thin, almost invisible seam in the concrete wall near the main entrance. A hidden door, a contingency exit. It required a special keycard or perhaps a biometric bypass. "We need power," I glared, my eyes fixed on the hidden door. "If this place is still powered, or if we can get power to it, we might be able to bypass the security." We located the main power conduit, a thick cable leading from the building to a buried power line. Ben, with his mechanic's knowledge, identified the entry point. With some effort and the use of the wrench and hatchet, he managed to strip away the insulation, exposing the wiring. Using our scavenged solar panels and batteries, he rigged a temporary power source, sending a trickle of current into the building system. It was a long shot, but worth the effort. A low hum, almost imperceptible, emanated from within the building. Power. It was getting power. We returned to the main entrance, to the biometric scanner. The light on the scanner, previously dark, now flickered green. Success! But how to bypass it? We had no fingerprints, no iris scans. My eyes scanned the ground, dust, debris, and then a small laminated security badge half buried in the dirt. It had a photo of a woman, a Dr. Eris Thorne, and a magnetic strip. "Ben, try this," I exclaimed, handing him the badge. He swiped it through the reader. A soft click. The heavy steel door slid inward with a hydraulic sigh, revealing a dark, ominous corridor beyond. The air inside was cold, stagnant, filled with the faint clinical smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. The dread deepened. This was the smell of laboratories, but tainted with something more disturbing. We entered, our footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The corridor was lined with more steel doors, each marked with a number and a symbol. Offices, data storage. The emergency lights, powered by our temporary rig, flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The facility was pristine, almost disturbingly so. No signs of struggle, no broken equipment. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. This was the profound mystery of the outbreak, the investigation. What happened here? We moved deeper into the facility, our senses on high alert. The silence was unnerving, too silent. We found the main lab, glass walls, stainless steel equipment, and then the horror. Several bodies, scientists in lab coats, lay sprawled on the floor. No obvious wounds, no blood, but their faces were pale, their skin shriveled, their eyes wide and staring. They had been drained, completely. But there were no creatures, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had simply succumbed. Or perhaps the creatures had done their work, and then retreated, leaving behind the chilling evidence of their silent, efficient predation. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. If the building was sealed, how did they get in? And why were there no signs of a fight? Then my gaze fell on a large reinforced containment unit in the center of the lab. It was made of thick, transparent polymer, and inside, a single, horrifying specimen. It was one of them. A creature, but different. It was smaller, thinner, almost fetal in appearance. Its skin was translucent, revealing a network of pulsing veins. And its eyes, not glowing but dull, milky white. It was clearly not active, perhaps in a state of suspended animation or a controlled environment. A data screen next to the containment unit flickered to life, powered by our rigged connection. It displayed complex genetic sequences, biological data, and a series of cryptic scientific notes. My scientific background, once a mundane tool for data analysis, was now my most valuable asset. The notes, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, detailed experiments with pathogen designated Project Chimera. It was a synthetic retrovirus designed to enhance human physiology to create super soldiers. But something had gone horribly wrong. The notes described an accidental mutation, an unforeseen side effect. The retrovirus, instead of enhancing, had caused rapid cellular necrosis and a complete metabolic shutdown, followed by a secondary effect, a hyper-efficient enzyme system that rapidly extracted and processed blood, converting it into a new, stable energy source for the host. And then the horrifying transformation into the creatures we now knew. My blood ran cold. It wasn't natural, it was man-made. A bioweapon, an experiment gone rogue, the ultimate personal conflict, the realization that humanity had brought this apocalypse upon itself. The HaemovoricSyndrome was a scientific name for a man-made monster. The sheer hubris of it, to play God and unleash hell. The notes also detailed the creature's weaknesses, the extreme sensitivity to UV radiation, the cellular denaturing caused by high heat, and the neurological disruption caused by extreme blunt force trauma to the cranium. All of our observations confirmed, but then a chilling last entry, dated just days break. Subject Gamma 7 breached containment, unforeseen cognitive development, extreme predatory instincts, communicative capabilities observed, attempts to recapture unsuccessful, evacuation initiated. Subject Gamma 7. This wasn't just a bioweapon. It was an intelligent, evolving entity. It had breached containment, not through brute force, but through cunning. It had learned. It had communicated. It was leading them. The dread returned, cold and overwhelming. Not just creatures, but an intelligent, coordinated enemy. This was a war, not just a survival game, and humanity was losing. As I stood there deciphering the horrific truth, a low hum, closer than before, filled the air. It wasn't from the containment unit. It was from somewhere else in the facility. My gaze snapped to a security camera feed on a nearby monitor. It flickered to life, displaying a grainy image from a basement level. And there, emerging from a darkened corridor, was a figure. Not one of the gaunt creatures we had encountered. This one was different. It was larger, more muscular, almost human in its build, but its movements were too fluid, too precise. Its eyes, even on the grainy monitor, glowed with an unnerving, predatory intelligence, and it carried something in its hand. Not a weapon, but a scientific instrument. Subject Gamma 7, it had survived, it was here, and it was studying us. The dread was absolute. We were not the hunters, we were the hunted. And our enemy was not just a monster, but a sentient, evolving predator, born of humanity's own folly. The chilling survival story had just revealed its true antagonist, a terrifying reflection of our own scientific hubris. The game had truly changed, and we were not prepared. The revelation of Subject Gamma 7, the engine ApexPredator, hit me with a force that sent a chill far deeper than the cool 55-degree Fahrenheit air of the lab. My hands, which had been deftly navigating the scientific data, now trembled uncontrollably. This wasn't just an outbreak, it was a hostile takeover, orchestrated by an intelligent, adaptive entity. My personal conflict, the struggle to maintain my scientific objectivity, buckled under the weight of this horrifying truth. We hadn't been fighting a disease. We'd been fighting a war against something smarter than us, something we had created. Elias, Ben, and Clara, seeing the look on my face, immediately came to my side. "What is it?" Elias demanded, his hand already on his shotgun. "Subject Gamma 7, I whispered, pointing at the monitor showing the creasement. "It's not just a creature. It's intelligent. It breached containment. It's the origin point. And it's here. It's been watching us." I quickly explained what I had pieced together from the synthetic retrovirus, Project Chimera, designed for enhancement, accidentally mutating into the HaemovoricSyndrome. The subsequent development of an intelligent, communicative variant, Gamma 7, leading the charge. "So it's leading them?" Ben asked, his voice filled with disbelief and horror. "A general for the vampires?" "Not just a general," I corrected, my voice raspy. "It might be a hive mind, or a master. The notes mentioned communicative capabilities. It could be directing their movements, their strategies, their hunting patterns. This explains their coordination, their cunning." The dread in the room was palpable. The enemy was no longer a mindless horde. It was a strategic opponent capable of adapting, learning, and possibly even anticipating our moves. This escalated the chilling survival story from a desperate flight into a terrifying, asymmetrical war. The hum intensified, not from the basement, but from above us, from outside the lab. They were circling, their numbers growing, drawn by Gamma 7, or perhaps by our own panicked presence. The temperature was dropping, now nearing 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and dusk was approaching. "We need to get out of here," Clara urged, clutching her child tighter. "Now!" "No," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "Not yet. If Gamma 7 is here, if it's controlling them, then this facility might hold the key to stopping it. A counteragent, a weakness we haven't discovered yet, or a way to trap it." My eyes scanned the lab, searching for anything, any last piece of data that could give us an edge. The screen still glowed, displaying fragmented genetic sequences. My scientific brain kicked in, pushing aside the fear. This was my purpose now, to understand, to find a way. I noticed a separate, heavily encrypted terminal in the corner of the lab. "Archive Projects," its label read. If any classified data existed, it would be there. "Ben, can you get into that terminal?" I asked, pointing. If there are any other projects, any other experimental data, it could be crucial. Ben, despite his fear, nodded. "I'll try. Looks like a tough one, though." He began typing furiously, his fingers flying across the old keyboard. As he worked, a low growl echoed from the corridor outside the lab. They were getting closer. The creatures, or perhaps Gamma 7 itself, had found our entry point. "Elias, cover the door," I shouted. "Clara, stay close to me." Elias positioned himself by the lab door, shotgun at the ready. We could hear the scuttling, scraping sounds outside, a horrifying symphony of approaching predators. The air grew colder, thick with their metallic scent. Ben grunted, his face illuminated by the green glow of the terminal. "Got it. Password was Chimera Project. Typical government security." He scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping him. The screen filled with files, hundreds of them, genetic sequences, behavioral studies, containment protocols, and then a file labeled Contingency, Subject Alpha. "What is that?" I asked, leaning closer. Ben clicked on it. The screen displayed schematics for a specialized sonic emitter, designed to disrupt neurological function in highly evolved biological organisms. "Sonic disruption," I murmured. "A frequency that interferes with their brainwaves, or whatever controls their re-engineered bodies. If it's truly intelligent, perhaps its unique neurological structure is susceptible." The concept was plausible. If their advanced physiology relied on specific neural pathways or resonant frequencies for their rapid regeneration and coordination, then a targeted sonic pulse could effectively short-circuit them. It was a sophisticated, scientific weapon. The door to the lab groaned, then vibrated under a powerful impact. They were trying to break in. "Hurry, Ben!" Elias yelled, firing a warning shot into the corridor. The blast echoed, momentarily silencing the creatures, but it wouldn't last. Ben frantically scrolled through the schematics. "It's a prototype," he said. "Requires specialized components and a massive power source." My heart sank. A prototype. We didn't have time to build one. We were trapped. Then a new thought sparked. The containment unit. The one with the inert creature inside. It was a specialized piece of equipment designed to keep their biology stable. It had to have a complex energy signature, perhaps even a sonic component to keep the creature dormant. "The containment unit," I exclaimed, pointing at the large glass chamber. "Ben, check its power schematics. It might be able to generate the frequency we need, or at least be modified to do so." Ben, without hesitation, turned his attention to the unit's control panel. His fingers flew across the console, inputting commands, overriding safeties. Elias fired another shot, buying us precious seconds. The hum outside the lab grew into a furious roar. The door splintered, revealing glimpses of glowing eyes and clawed hands. They were pouring in. "Almost there!" Ben shouted, sweat pouring down his face. "This thing has a powerful sonic output, but it's set for containment, not offensive. I need to reroute the power, recalibrate the frequency." He worked with frantic desperation, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. My personal conflict, the ethical dilemma of using a potentially dangerous technology, was silenced by the roar of the encroaching monsters. This was survival. Suddenly, a massive shape detached itself from the gloom. Not one of the regular creatures, but something larger, more agile, moving with an unnerving grace. "Subject Gamma 7. It lunged at Elias, a blur of motion. Elias barely managed to get a shot off before Gamma 7 slammed into him, sending him flying. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Gamma 7 advanced, its glowing eyes fixed on me, on the console, on the data. It knew. It understood what we were trying to do. "Ben!" I screamed. "Now!" Ben slammed his hand down on a large red button on the console. For a moment, nothing. Then a high-pitched, almost inaudible whine filled the lab. It grew in intensity, vibrating through the floor, through my very bones. It was a sound that seemed to shred the air itself. For Gamma 7 paused, its head tilting, a look of what almost seemed like confusion on its face. The other creatures, pouring into the lab, stumbled, their movements becoming erratic. The whine intensified, becoming a piercing shriek that clawed at my brain. I clamped my hands over my ears, gritting my teeth against the agonizing sound. It was the sonic emitter. Gamma 7 let out a guttural shriek, not of rage, but of pain, of profound discomfort. Its body began to convulse, its glowing eyes flickering wildly. The other creatures writhed on the floor, their forms beginning to shimmer, to dissolve into black ash. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The sonic frequency, calibrated precisely to their new physiology, was tearing them apart from the inside. Their hyper-efficient cells, unable to cope with the disruptive resonance, were breaking down at an accelerated rate. Gamma 7, however, was resilient. It stumbled but did not fall. It let out another shriek, a sound of pure agony, and launched itself at the containment unit, at the controls, trying to shut it down. "Stop it!" Elias roared, scrambling to his feet, grabbing a discarded wrench. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a lead pipe from a workbench, the metal cold and heavy in my hands. As Gamma 7 clawed at the console, trying to disable the emitter, I swung the pipe with all my might, aiming for its head. It turned, its intelligent eyes narrowing, anticipating my move. It was fast, faster than any of the others. It dodged, and the pipe merely glanced off its shoulder. It snarled, a terrifying, intelligent sound of rage. But the sonic emitter was still blasting. Its body was convulsing more violently now, shimmering, beginning to dissolve, a fine black dust already flaking from its skin. Its regeneration was failing. It launched itself at me, a final desperate attack, its clawed hand outstretched, its distended mouth opening. In that moment, a flicker of memory. My grandfather teaching me to swing a baseball bat. The power of a full, committed swing. I didn't dodge. I stood my ground. As it closed the distance, I brought the pipe down with a primal scream, a desperate all-or-nothing blow, directly at its skull. There was a sickening crunch, a sound that reverberated through the very core of my being. Gamma 7 froze, its eyes wide, its mouth agape. The glow in its eyes dimmed, flickered, then died. Its body convulsed once more, violently, and then, with a final echoing shriek that was more a release than a sound, it dissolved into a rapidly expanding cloud of black ash. The sonic emitter whined down, then went silent. The lab was still, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt dust. We stood there, panting, our bodies shaking, staring at the pile of ash that was once our intelligent, terrifying enemy. The silence was absolute, a profound relief after the cacophony of horror. We did it," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "We stopped it," I confirmed, my voice hoarse. "Or at least this one. The source." The realization settled over us. The HaemovoricSyndrome might still exist. Its countless carriers were still out there, but the one that was directing them, the intelligent apex predator, was gone. The chilling survival story had just seen a pivotal victory, a turning point in the silent war. We stumbled out of the lab, exhausted, but with a newfound sense of purpose. We had found a weapon, we had found answers, and we had fought back. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across the island. The hum of the remaining creatures was still there, a faint, distant whisper, but it felt different now, less menacing, disorganized. Without their leader, their movements seemed less coordinated, their hunts less efficient. We gathered the other survivors, their faces filled with relief and cautious hope as we explained what had happened. We had dealt a major blow, perhaps even a decisive one, to the organized threat. But the world was still broken. The city was still burning. And the creatures, though leaderless, are still a threat. Our fight for survival was far from over, but now, armed with knowledge and a new weapon, we had a fighting chance. The terrifying struggle was no longer about desperate flight, but about strategic engagement. And for the first time since the outbreak began, I felt a flicker of something resembling hope for humanity's future. The immediate aftermath of destroying Subject Gamma-7 was a strange mix of profound exhaustion and exhilaration. We had faced the architect of our nightmare, and against all odds, prevailed. But the battle was far from over. The world was still a shattered landscape, the cities still burned, and countless numbers of the creatures, the HaemovoricSyndrome carriers, still roamed. The temperature on Bainbridge Island, having dipped to 48 degrees Fahrenheit during the height of our confrontation, was now slowly rising with the approach of dawn. My scientific mind, fueled by the adrenaline, immediately focused on the implications. Gamma-7's death through sonic disruption confirmed the vulnerability of their re-engineered nervous system. This meant the sonic emitter, or a scaled-up version of it, was the key, not just for defense, but for offense, for eradication. We spent the rest of the night at the ranger station, the small group of survivors huddling together, a mixture of grim determination and fragile hope on their faces. The hum of the creatures outside was noticeably less coordinated, more sporadic. Without their intelligent leader, their hive mind seemed to have fractured, their predatory efficiency diminished. They were still dangerous, but less strategic, more akin to mindless animals. As the first rays of the sun painted the sky, we contacted the Big Sky survivors in Bozeman. My voice, though hoarse from shouting and fear, carried a new authority. I recounted everything: the discovery of the research facility, Project Chimera, the terrifying truth of Gamma-7 and its destruction with the sonic emitter. The voice from Bozeman was stunned. "You found the source, and you stopped it? This is incredible, unbelievable. We've been analyzing their physiology, but we never could isolate a central control mechanism." I sent them the schematics for the sonic emitter, along with my theoretical breakdown of its mechanism of action and the remaining genetic data I'd managed to copy from the lab terminal. The exchange of information was a lifeline, a shared beacon of scientific endeavor in a world plunged into darkness. "This changes everything," the Bozeman voice declared, a new energy in their tone. "If we can replicate this, scale it up, we might have a weapon. A chance to fight back, not just survive, but reclaim." The thought, once unthinkable, now seemed within reach. Reclaim, not just our lives, but our world. The chilling survival story had transitioned from desperate flight to strategic counterattack. Our immediate task was to secure the research facility. It was a treasure trove of information, potentially of components and a strategic location. It was also incredibly vulnerable now that its secrets were revealed. We couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands, or being destroyed by the remaining creatures. Under the protection of daylight, we returned to the facility. The air inside was still thick with the acrid smell of burnt dust, a grim reminder of our recent battle. We methodically cleared the building, ensuring no remaining creatures lurked in the shadows. The bodies of the scientists were still there, a somber monument to humanity's scientific hubris and its terrifying consequences. My personal conflict, the ethical implications of the Project Chimera, weighed heavily on me. The very drive to enhance, to push boundaries, had unleashed this horror. It was a chilling lesson in the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. But now, that same ambition, redirected and tempered by a desperate will to survive, was our only hope. We discovered a surprisingly well-stocked storage room, filled with MREs, meals ready to eat, bottled water, medical supplies, and even a small arsenal of conventional firearms. The scientists had been prepared for a long siege, or perhaps for a controlled experiment that went awry. We now had enough provisions to last us for months, and better weapons. More importantly, we found a fully functional, larger-scale version of the sonic emitter prototype. It was dormant, but with power it could be activated. It was a formidable piece of equipment designed to create a concentrated, directional sonic pulse, not just a broad area of effect. This was a weapon. Ben, his eyes gleaming with mechanical fascination, immediately began to inspect it. "This thing is incredible," he muttered, tracing the complex circuitry. "If we can power it up, we could clear this island in days." The idea was exhilarating, but we needed a massive power source. The solar panels were only good for trickle charging. The generator at the ranger station was too small. My gaze fell on the facility's main power generator, a large, industrial-grade diesel engine designed to power the entire complex. If we could get it running, we could activate the sonic emitter. And with the fuel we'd found, we had a fighting chance. It took us 2 grueling days to get the main generator running. Ben worked tirelessly, repairing damaged circuits, bleeding fuel lines, his mechanics expertise proving invaluable. The roar of the massive engine, when it finally kicked to life, was a sound of immense power, of defiant life against the silence of death. With the main generator running, the research facility came alive. Lights flickered on, ventilation systems hummed, and the heavy-duty sonic emitter powered up, its control panel glowing with a menacing readiness. Our next objective: clear Bainbridge Island. Systematically, we devised a plan. A team armed with firearms and the sonic emitter would move in sections, broadcasting the disruptive frequency, driving the creatures into the open, or dissolving them where they stood. The first test of the full-scale sonic emitter was terrifying, yet exhilarating. As we activated it, a high-pitched, inaudible scream filled the air, detectable only by the agonizing reactions of the creatures. They emerged from the shadows, writhing, convulsing, their bodies disintegrating into black ash before our very eyes. It was horrifying to witness, but also deeply satisfying. This was the vengeance of humanity. Over the next week, we systematically cleared Bainbridge Island. It was a grim, bloody task. We encountered pockets of resistance, creatures that seemed to possess a lingering, primal cunning, but without Gamma 7's direction, they were disorganized, easy to outmaneuver. The island, once a symbol of our entrapment, was becoming a stronghold, a beacon of hope. The chilling survival story was slowly shifting into a story of recovery, of reclamation. As we cleared the last remaining areas, the hum of the creatures completely disappeared from the island. The air grew cleaner, the silence less oppressive, now filled with the natural sounds of wind and the distant lapping of waves. The island, once dead, was returning to life. We established regular contact with the Bozeman group. They were working on scaling up their own versions of the sonic emitter, preparing for larger-scale eradication efforts. Other survivor groups, scattered across the nation, began to emerge, forming a fragile network of hope, connected by ham radio. The apocalypse, it seemed, was not total. Humanity, bruised and battered, was fighting back. My role shifted again, from survivor to leader, from investigator to strategist. My scientific knowledge, my understanding of the HaemovoricSyndrome, became central to the planning. I worked with the Bozeman group, exchanging data, refining the sonic technology, devising strategies for clearing larger infected zones. The future was still uncertain. Many cities like Seattle were likely condemned, monuments to a terrible mistake. The creatures still existed in vast numbers, but we had a weapon, we had knowledge, and we had each other. The personal conflict within me, the trauma of loss and the weight of responsibility, was now balanced by a profound sense of purpose. The world would never be the same. The scars of the outbreak, the memory of the burning cities, the chilling knowledge of our own folly would remain forever. Humanity had been brought to its knees, reminded of its fragility, and of the terrifying consequences of playing God. But from the ashes of the old world, a new one was beginning to form. A world where survival was no longer about hiding, but about fighting. A world where knowledge was the ultimate weapon, and resilience the ultimate virtue. The sun rose on Bainbridge Island, illuminating a world that was still dangerous, still broken, but no longer hopeless. The air was crisp, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a faint warmth spread through my chest, not just from the sun, but from within. This wasn't the end of the chilling survival story. It was merely the end of the beginning. The struggle would continue. But now we were armed, we were informed, and we were ready. For whatever came next, humanity would be ready. Thanks for tuning in. If this narrative pulled you into its depths, consider giving the video a like. Your support is how these stories get told. And if you're ready for more chilling, plausible adventures, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community of explorers. What will we uncover next?